Welcome to the Probate Realtor Show, your one source for selling and buying real estate through trust and probate. Hear directly from the best attorneys and trusted advisors on how executors and administrators navigate the probate process in and out of court. Being a personal representative or successor trustee can be a daunting task, and often beneficiaries don't have a clear plan. Let us help you make the right decision for your clients, your family, and your legacy. And now, here's your host, the probate realtor himself, Matias Baker Masucci.
Welcome, everybody, to another very exciting episode of our show. Today, we are talking to Heather Reynolds, which is an attorney who practices in the area of estate planning. Heather, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Matias.
So one of the things we're going to talk about, so I'll let my audience know this. I reach out and to attorneys and sometimes I mention, what are the topics you want to talk about? And boy, did I get a wonderful surprise, a wonderful answer from Heather. So I can't wait to talk about one of the things we'll be talking today about is creative legacy. And stay tuned because it's going to be interesting. But before we get to that, I want to find out, Heather, what are the things that make you passionate about estate planning?
I'm glad you asked because that's what allows me to go to my work every day and enjoy what I do. I really love and have for over 20 years loved empowering my clients to take back something that is the most important value in my life, and that is freedom.
Right.
And freedom for me became an issue when I noticed that in my own family with, certain people who passed away suddenly and unexpectedly, that if we don't write our own will or trust or estate plan in California, there is one for us. And the state of California wrote it for us. So we all have a will, even though 70% of us think we don't. We all have a will. We all have something that's going to happen. And it's the state, the judges who decide not only how everything's going to be distributed and who's going to raise our children when we pass away, if we don't opt out of that, but they also get to decide, the judges get to decide who gets to make our medical decisions and when should those decisions be made? Should we be kept on life support? What should happen and who gets to be there at the hospital and who doesn't based on their criteria? So there's this default law that we don't realize we need to opt out of if we don't like the default. Same true with prenuptial agreements. There's already a prenup in place for everybody in California the moment we get married, but we don't know what it says because we never bothered to talk to a lawyer to find out. If we don't like the default law and we don't want some judge deciding how our life and our death and our children and everything's going to go, then we actually have the power to opt out of the default law, take our power back, and say how we want it to go based on our values and what we want to have happen with our monies and our children and anything else we can think of that matters to us. So my favorite part of my job is helping people to write their own values into their decision-making for the future when we all become incapacitated at some point. This is not just about death. This is about, God forbid, I'm in the hospital for a couple of months and somebody has to pay my rent or my mortgage so that when I come out of the hospital, not only do I not have just one health crisis to deal with, but now I might be evicted and in bankruptcy and my credit is ruined and I can't get another, all because I didn't have one simple estate planning document, and that's called a power of attorney. And, maybe you can get them free online. You can hire an attorney for $100 to do it for you. But it is probably, in my view, the most empowering document for everyone in California, probably in the United States, in my opinion, based on the horror stories that I've seen. It's totally unnecessary suffering. We can't stop dying. We can't stop the fact that we might become incapacitated, but we can certainly stop and opt out of the unnecessary suffering that often goes with it. And that is what someone else has decided for my life and my death. So reminding clients that it's not as hard as they think, and I'm there to hold their hand, and we're going to get this done quickly so that they don't have to think about it ever again unless they change their mind. Just simple documents that put their wishes in place and thereby opt out of the government running their life and their death and their children's lives. I get to see the horror stories every day when people don't do it. And so my favorite thing is to help people put in place what they really want, what really matters to them.
Thank you very much for that answer. I love that. And actually, there are two things in there that you said which stood out to me, which I think are worth for us to talk a little bit more about. One of the things that you said in during your answer is all the elements that are in an estate plan. You mentioned a few of the things. It's not just about what you want to do with your stuff. It's not just about that. There's a lot more to that people are not aware. So for instance, like you talked about the healthcare directive and the power of attorney and all those things. Let's talk a little bit more about these things, if you don't mind. One of the things is like the components of an estate plan, of an effective estate plan. Let's talk about, the difference between a will and a trust and an healthcare directive and what a power of attorney can do. Because somebody can say, I have a power of attorney, or I have a will. I don't have to worry about any of these things. But it's not that simple, is it now, Heather?
No, and everybody's custom. So, one person's answer is going to be different than another person's answer. My feeling that my job is to empower my clients by telling them these are the typical elements that one includes in their estate plan, which I'll tell you about, and the difference between the two, between a will and a trust estate plan, and then the pros and the cons of each in their custom circumstances. So then they are in control of deciding what's best for their family, because I may be really good at law, but I am not the expert on their family, their values, their situation. So it's really important that I'm just there to support the family, the client, in deciding what it is that they want to do. But most people don't have the pros and the cons handed to them in plain English when it comes to making these decisions. So getting an attorney that will educate a client is a really important thing, rather than just an attorney saying, you need a trust and let me show you why, or not show you why, but it needs to be an AB structure and it's a Q-tip and a Q-pert and all, and the client's eyes glaze over and go, okay. And they don't know what they're signing oftentimes. So a big part of what I do is education, because I trust my client to be the expert on their wishes, their values, their family. My job is just to bring the legal pros and cons. So when a client asks me, what's the difference? Why should I think about a will or a trust? I say, well, if we want to go to probate, probate is the court process where the judge supervises. It's public, it's expensive, it takes a long time to get through probate typically. Before COVID, it was probably, I could get through a probate. The fastest I ever did was 6 months, and that's really pushing it. More like a year is the normal probate. And if there's any issue that pops up, like you have to sell a house or do something like that, then it's going to be longer. And after COVID, it's like 1.5 to 2 years now after COVID, because the courts are full. It's almost like you're in an emergency room and the judge can't see you. I just had a client whose case got bumped 6 months just this week, because the court doesn't have time to talk to everybody. So you don't have any control over it, and life feels out of control already. You don't have access to the assets immediately until you get a court order, either because somebody became incapacitated or somebody passed away, and it's all public. Like everybody gets to know what Jackie Onassis, JFK's wife, gave when she died. Why? Because she had a will. A will is public. We have a duty to file the will with the county courthouse within 30 days of death. It's public record. Somebody can put it on the internet. Everybody gets to know how much money you have, who got it, and when. And your death certificate is public record. So somebody could easily take your social security number from it and then pretend to be you and open up a bunch of credit cards in your name after you're gone or while you're incapacitated potentially. So having privacy now has become more important than ever for a lot of people. Only a trust can offer privacy if the person's estate or value of their assets at the time of their passing is greater than $184,500. So that's the current cutoff for probate. If somebody passes away with less than that, and sometimes people underestimate the value of their businesses or the value of certain assets they haven't really thought about before. If they're under that amount, then they only need a simple will, because the will say what their wishes are and they won't end up in probate. However, the family, whoever's next in charge, even with a will, no probate, everybody has to wait 40 days when someone dies. before they have access to those assets. And you have to get a lawyer to write up an affidavit, typically, to attach the death certificate, attach the will, and then walk into the bank and try to get access to those accounts.
Right.
Because there's no court proceedings, there's no court order, so you're going to have something to prove that you're the next one in charge. And just walking in with a will is not enough. So you will end up having to hire a lawyer at some point to get help to get those assets. But your hands will be tied for about 40 days,
Right.
even if you're under the $184,500 threshold. So it's kind of an inconvenience. And if people need food, clothing, and shelter, and it's all in your name, it might be hard to who's feeding your children for those 40 days?
Yeah.
How are we buying diapers? Like, it's important to have immediate access to those assets, and not just when we die, but if we're incapacitated. So it takes months to get in front of a judge if I'm incapacitated and my, say, husband needs to sign my tax return. He can't.
Right.
If we're in the middle of selling or refinancing our house, he can't. He has
Right.
no authority to sign my name on important documents, let alone reach into my personal bank accounts. So having that power of attorney, whether you have a will or a trust, is by far one of the most important documents. So the biggest difference between wills and trusts is privacy, the delay that, so a trust is wonderful for clients who have more than $184,500 and they want to avoid probate. I've only had one client, when I explain what probate's like for people, I don't enjoy going to probate. My clients don't want to go to probate. Nobody wants some total stranger to just kind of apply the law to that family and not have it feel like somebody cares and it's custom. Right. Has nothing to do with what you might have wanted. I'll give you an example of a client who didn't have a will or a trust, and his wife passed away suddenly, and they had a 9-year-old son. Well, what he didn't realize is California law had written her will for her, and it said that this house, as her separate property that she brought into the marriage, was her separate property. So California law says it divides 50-50 between the husband and the son, the 9-year-old son. But because we're in probate and it's not in a trust, she didn't get to say what she really wanted in that regard. She could have had his half go into a trust for him or just given it to dad, but she didn't. So the judge decides that. Well, this 9-year-old owns half the house now, and the judge is supervising what is called a guardianship. And so the child's money is held, his half of the house is held inside the court system for the next 9 years, because until he turns age 18, at which point he owns that money, which is about $500,000 in this family. So dad got half of the house and son got half the house. And the judge said, well, a house is not a good investment for a 9-year-old boy. It's risky. It could have a fire, an earthquake. We want to put it in a diversified portfolio. So we either need to sell the house to get his money out and invest it the way the judge thinks it should be invested, which means he didn't just lose his mom, he's now about to lose his house. Or what dad decided to do was buy his son out of the house.
Wow.
So he refinanced the house in order to move about $500,000 into this little bank account that the court supervises, that the son is not allowed to touch until he's 18. And so dad is struggling, not just by losing his wife and not having enough money now to raise him very well, because he put it all into this separate bank account that you're not allowed to touch, according to the judge, unless the son needs it for something. He's starving, because dad's supposed to provide all that. Dad's supposed to pay for food, clothing, and shelter until he's 18. So the judge says, no, you can't reach into the money from mom. That's for his college. That's for his future. That's son's money, not to be used for raising him. So dad is struggling financially to raise this 9-year-old. And when he becomes 18, he gets that $500,000, which in 9 years could easily double in a good investment. He's going to be handed $800,000 to $1 million on his 18th birthday by the judge. And most 18-year-olds don't do well with $1 million, even with both parents alive, let alone not having any supervision, except maybe he'll listen to dad at 18. Who knows, right?
Yeah.
So it's not what mom would have wanted. It's kind of interesting how the law makes assumptions about what mom would have wanted, and then ties dad's hands financially for the next 9 years. So they're going to be like scraping by. and no access to that money till his 18th birthday, which is, not a typical parenting move, is not to hand an 18-year-old $1 million on their birthday.
Right.
So that's the kind of disempowerment that, puts, I don't know, fuel on the fire when you've just, suddenly lost your wife and the son's mother, and now you're strapped for cash and you're resentful that your son's going to get $1 million on his 18th birthday, because that's not going to go well typically for anyone. So that's part of why I became passionate. I got to see those horror stories and think, I think people would have done this a little differently had they known how this was going to go.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that horror story with us and really elucidating on the fact that how important it is, because if you don't make the decisions, the state will make those decisions on your behalf. And as that story explains, it may not be in the best, what looks like the best interest for the family. So thank you for sharing that. Now let's move on to the topic that really caught my attention that you wanted to talk about, which is obviously related to this, which is, we just talked about it. If you have your wishes, let them be known so the state doesn't decide for you. And on that note, leaving a creative legacy behind. Like, tell me about it and tell me how you arrived at it. And I know, and if you could share with us, some of the things that you have done to leave a creative legacy behind, I'm really dying to hear about it.
Yeah. So I said my first value is freedom. My second value is fun. I like to have fun. That's why I live in Hawaii and I work with my clients remotely on Zoom. So we can all have a lot more fun. I don't need to dress up like a stuffy lawyer. We can have fun. So one of the ways that I like to have fun is to remind clients that we are not limited by, when we draft a trust, we are not limited by anything other than our imagination. And, we can't break the law, right? The law, meaning you can't tell people to kill people when you die or have a hit list or something like that. That's a little too creative. But what we can do is everything else. And so one of the persons who inspired me was Robert Louis Stevenson, who wrote Treasure Island. I love treasure hunts and treasure islands and things like that. And I live on an island. So I thought, his will popped up. And he's such a beautiful writer. I read his will, and there's a gift he gives in his will to a friend, or actually, I think he adopted this adult woman. Her name was Mary, and Mary's birthday was December 25th. And her whole life, she complained that she was always having to share her birthday with Christmas and Jesus and all that. Right. So when he died, Robert Louis Stevenson gave her his birthday. I think it was November 11th. He said, I don't need it anymore. I don't need it anymore, but you really need this because you deserve to be celebrated on your own day. And then he goes on for about a paragraph with the most beautiful accolades about why Mary deserves to be celebrated. And I thought, wow, that, we may not remember Martin Luther King, for example, for the money he left his family, but we certainly remember the I Have a Dream speech, right? That's his legacy. So other people left legacies that had nothing to do with money or who raised their children, but their greatest contribution to humanity was, in his case, his writing, right? And this gift to this wonderful woman. And it was the writing that she'll never forget. She probably framed it and would never forget that, So there's some wonderful things that we can do to expand our idea of what can a trust hold. It can hold creative ideas. In my case, I wrote a treasure hunt into my estate plan, into my trust, so that even though I can't afford to do this today while I'm alive, when I'm gone, I've set aside $100,000 to take my nieces on a trip around the world where they're going to have to solve the puzzle, and they have to learn to scuba dive, and they're going to find the treasure somewhere underwater. But it's going to get them out into the world traveling, which is a big value of mine. I was blessed to be able to travel when I was in college, and I want that for them as well. And so to force them in a fun way to go off on an adventure, to find real treasure, take a couple of weeks vacation, have it all paid for, and never forget the memory that that's going to make for them, I think is going to be a fun contribution that while I can't afford to do it today, I can definitely afford to do it after I don't need my house anymore. And then it can be sold, right? Or the life insurance or whatever it might be.
Right.
So I've had clients who have lots of grandchildren and they can't afford to pay for their education today, but they say in their will and trust, it's really important that everybody gets $100,000 to go to college of their choice, whatever that may be. And so their legacy is education. And that might not sound as creative, but I had one client who he gave his children 3 options of what to do with his body when he passed away. Mm-hmm. And he had a great sense of humor, this guy. And I had never met his 4 adult children when he passed away, but they called me the day he died and they said, we're at the mortuary. They're asking whether he wanted to be cremated or buried or what. We know we've never met you, but we can't find the document where he wrote that. It's called the Advanced Healthcare Directive. Mm-hmm. Do you have a copy? Can you tell us what he said he wanted? And I pulled it up on my computer because I've kept every document from every client for 20 years. And I said, oh, you're going to love this. So here's what he said. He said, okay, option number 1, I want to be buried in my suit, in my Cadillac, with the top down, my favorite music blaring, dig a big hole and drive it in, right? That was option 1. Option 2, and he's just passed, and I'm telling his family this answer, right? And then the second thing he said is, okay, no, I want you to take a big rubber mallet. I want you to freeze my body, put it in a freezer, freeze my body, take it to the beach, and all of you get a big rubber mallet and break it into 1,000,000 pieces of sand. Okay, that was option number 2. And then number 3 was whatever's cheapest, which was pretty funny because everybody knew he was thrifty. So they, of course, chose the cheapest approach. But it was fun for them at that moment to remember the sense of humor that their dad had, and that his gift of humor, his whole life, had been a big part of his life. So some people add humor to and embellish their estate plans. Some people who enjoy, fun and treasure hunts, we can add that to our estate plan. Martin Luther King would have added another speech to say at his funeral, right, of his vision for the future.
Right.
Because a trust, and it's a really magical document, actually. A trust is trusting that someone who's called your trustee is going to follow your wishes when you pass. And you're trusting that they will. There are no trust police, to watch and make sure that they do. So you're really trusting. So if you said, my greatest gift to this planet is world peace, I just haven't had enough time and money to do that yet, then ask your grandchildren to carry that forward. And in your go create world peace. You don't even have to have money to contribute that to the planet. You just have to speak it. So speaking in your trust, this declaration, his trust is called a declaration. It's a contract between you, and you hope that you trust someone enough to actually follow it. So someday it might inspire your grandchildren to actually do what it is that you didn't accomplish in this lifetime. Even though you didn't have time and money now, doesn't mean somebody won't be inspired in the future to follow through.
That is so beautiful. I'm so glad you shared it. And I think I mentioned it right at the beginning of the show. In my own estate plan, I have 4 kids. And one of the things that I was thinking when I was in my estate plan, I was like, I really hope they get along, throughout because you never know, people have different personality. I was like, I'm going to put something so that they have to spend time together when something happens to me, no matter what. So they're going to have to go on a hike, and there's a special place where I want my remains to be. So they're going to have to go on and things like that. And you know what? By the time I may modify it and add new things, now that I've met you, that I've talked to you, I'm inspired to even do more with that. It's funny because when you think about those things, you don't really realize it. The gift of the birthday is such a beautiful example. It's like, that just takes imagination to make it happen. It doesn't have to take much more than that. So I love it that you share that with us. And I think that's beautiful. And if I'm also adding this, because this is the kind of show that I run, I love your energy. You're smiling. I love it. Like, your clients are so lucky to have you, because if you're dealing with these things, like, I can imagine somebody, my dad just died, and you're like, well, buried him in a Cadillac, or, coming from somebody like you would be definitely worth listening to. Now, let me ask you about your journey, because this is very interesting. Our audience connect. Obviously, the goal of the show is to educate people, but also to make sure that people can find people such as yourself when the time comes. Actually, anytime, because the estate planning, there's never a bad time to get started on estate planning. So let's talk about your journey. When did you decide to become an attorney?
So I was an exchange student through Rotary International when I was about 19,
Mhm.
and you don't get to choose where you go. I wanted to go to France because I'd always studied the French language. I thought, oh, Paris, that sounds fun at 19. And instead, I was assigned to Istanbul, Turkey,
Okay.
which was quite a shocker, especially as a young woman. And
Mhm.
it was a total amazing, eye-opening how the world works kind of a experience that completely changed my life. And I became very passionate about women being treated not just fairly, but with dignity. And I
Right.
decided I wanted to do international human rights, and I wanted to work on women's rights in particular, so
Mhm.
that women would have more freedom, say, to drive a car, to have a job,
Right.
to have a job without having any sexual harassment
Mhm.
involved. And that experience of that year of a lot of sexual harassment, a lot of sexual assault by strangers,
Mhm.
really hit home for me about what I was going to be passionate about. And so I went to Georgetown Law Center to learn how to do that, thinking if I got to learn how to pass federal legislation, I thought, well, if I could pass legislation, then we could stop the bad guys from doing these things, at least in America. And then maybe I'd go to The Hague and do it for the world or something. But I realized after becoming a civil rights attorney in Oakland, California, and winning every case we touched to protect women, minority women in particular, from that kind of sexual assault
Mhm.
at a civil level. This is civil rights.
Right.
Even after a year of succeeding, we failed. And we failed because the system was so broken that we were pretending it was working. None of our clients were ever better off just because they won their lawsuit. These are
Right.
young women who needed a lot of support. And instead, we put them through the ringer, going through another year or two of
Mhm.
re-experiencing that event without the support they needed. And it wasn't fair to them. And I decided after a year of winning cases that it wasn't worth it and that I was pretending that the system was working. And I
Mhm.
didn't want to be part of that anymore. And I had $135,000 of loans to pay off. And I decided I'm just going to quit cold turkey. I'm not doing this. So this is not good for anyone. And being in battle every day with nasty people who just dig their heels in, even rapists will dig their heels in and say, I'm not a rapist. And, I
Right.
mean, look at Bill Cosby. He still denies that anything ever happened, right?
Right.
He's
Right.
not getting well. So anyway, that's just my personal opinion. So I decided I've got to do something that helps people, that keeps people
Right.
out of court, because I lost confidence that court was a place where justice was always going to happen for people, that it was a disillusion.
Mhm.
I had the illusion that the court was about justice, only to discover that the laws are not passed always to create justice, but sometimes just to pretend that we have justice. And so I didn't want to pretend anymore. So I decided to do something to keep people out of court. I wanted people to never step foot in a courthouse and give their power away to lawyers or judges again, if they could ever help it. And so unless they went in with their eyes wide open, right, about
Right.
how this is going to re-victimize, bring it up again. I had one 14-year-old girl who'd been raped, and her perpetrator gets to attack her on the stand because that's the law. And we were kicked out of the courtroom because the judge says, you two can't be here. We were the lawyers on the civil case, and this was the criminal case. And he just said, you can't be here. So she had nobody there to protect her while she's being cross-examined by the rapist, a 14-year-old girl. And I thought, this is just, who knew that this is how the system actually worked? So anyway, I decided to get into the profession of how do I keep clients out of court?
Mhm.
And I was from a family that could never afford a lawyer and never talked about law, never talked about lawyers, was totally disconnected from all of that. And I thought, if I could keep people out of probate court, that would be enough for now. And it would pay my law loans. So I don't have to, with litigation, with civil rights, sometimes you don't win a case for 10 years.
Right.
And you have to fork out the money from the beginning to end. So you need a couple $1,000,000 to be able to afford to be that.
Right.
That wasn't going to happen. So I needed to do something that just would fulfill my need to help people stay out of court, never have to make an argument in court again, if possible, and empower people to realize it's their life, it's their body, it's their money, it's their children, it's their values. Why give it away to some old white guy on a bench with a a thing on. I mean,
Right.
like, who would do that? Only people who don't know. And I'm surprised by how many people don't know that that's the default. That's what happens to all of us if we don't have stuff in place.
Thank you. I love that story. That's great. That's great. Now, before I let you go, I have a list of 30 questions, and I would like for you to pick a random number between 1 and 30, and I will ask that question. So you'll be responsible for the question I ask you in a way.
Oh, no. I love it. Okay, let's do 27.
Okay, 27. Okay. What was the last thing you regret buying?
Oh, my goodness. Oh, okay. The last thing
Or just a thing you regretted buying. Let's go with that. Maybe that's
yeah.
easier.
That's a great question. Let me feel into that. What do I regret buying? Oh my goodness. I'm trying to think of something. Yes. Okay. So a couple of years ago, I got into a contract to have access to a whole online legal library.
Mm-hmm.
And you pay a couple $100 a month to have access to all the cases and statutes and stuff. Well, because I don't go to court, I never use that. And it didn't occur to me, and I locked myself in for like 3 years to get that.
Wow.
Right. But yesterday, or just in the last couple of days, I signed up for something that is the AI now of this same product, but now add AI to it. So all I have to do is ask it a regular question in English. And then the AI goes and looks for all of the cases and does all the research and comes back with a memo that says, here's the answer to your question, your legal question, and here are all the cases that back it up, and here's everything you ever wanted to know. And for that, we pay a few $100s more than the old product. But now I'm locked into the old product when all I really need now that technology has improved tremendously. I think it's going to change the law as we know it.
Right.
That it's going to democratize, again, empower clients to be able to just go online and ask an English question and say, here's the answer to your case that you would have paid an attorney for 3-4 weeks of research and paralegals, and we still don't know if the answer is actually right. So I think there's a revolution happening, and I regret that I locked myself into a contract when technology is going so fast that I have to remember that in the future, that I need to be ready to jump and get out of old contracts so I can buy into the new ones. I'm excited to use AI for the benefit of empowering people in the law.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. I love it. One last thing before I let you go. What is the best way for somebody who wants to get a hold of you?
Yes. Well, I have a website. It's pretty easy to remember. It's heatherreynolds.com. And Reynolds is spelled REYNOLDS, like Reynolds Rep. And then you'll find me there, and you can set up a consultation, and then we'll talk about what your needs are and what what the pros and cons of will versus trust in your particular situation. And then I have a flat fee schedule for most clients. So you're looking at spending, for a typical will with powers of attorney, healthcare directives, high quality documents, custom for a particular client is usually around $1,800. And if you wanted a trust instead as a single person, you're looking at about 1,000 more, so about 2,800. And then if you're looking for a married couple trust, it's about 1,000 more. So you're looking in the 3,000 range for a married couple, because you get twice as many documents.
Of course. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's been such a pleasure to have you on the show. Like I said, great energy. I love it. Everything you've shared with us, it's of extreme value. So thank you again. And thanks for our entire audience that has joined us during this episode. So Heather, without further ado, I'm going to say goodbye. Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much, Matias. Have a good one.
It's been a pleasure.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Probate Realtor Show. Find more episodes and interact with us at probaterealtor.la. That's probaterealtor.la. Listen, ask questions, and get results. Don't forget to like and subscribe. The Probate Realtor Matias Baker Masucci is a licensed real estate broker in California, DRE number 020547763. Any legal information provided is for informational purposes only and not for the purpose of providing legal advice. Contact an attorney to obtain advice with respect to any particular legal issue or problem. We make no guarantees as to the accuracy of any information. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode.